Oh, 1 second. I'll be right with you. Okay, so now that you're here, we're going to expand a little bit on sort of the terminologies we learned in chapter 14. Hopefully, you've already looked at the PowerPoints and my corresponding sort of words with that PowerPoint. So nothing here should be new to you that we discuss here today. If you're listening to the, also I feel like I need to apologize for the PowerPoints. It's a little more difficult than I thought. I basically stuttered through the first one, and I think this take 3 is a little better. It should be uploaded now. Again, if you're watching this and haven't seen that, go do that. So we learned some basic concepts about disease. Reservoir, which is the sort of the origin of the disease. You can almost think of it as where the disease is normally found, or the pathogen is normally found in the environment. There's different modes of transmission. We saw various host-to-host methods, direct contact, which is where a person has to physically touch an infected person to transmit that disease. Indirect contact, where one person touches an inanimate object, spreading it to that object, which we call a fomite, and another person touches that object and gets the disease. And droplet transmission, where when we sneeze and cough, we spread pathogens in that droplet. Each droplet containing thousands to millions of microorganisms. And these are generally host-to-host transmissions. Environmental transmission we call vehicle transmission, and this can be broken down into airborne, waterborne, or foodborne. And this just means how that pathogen is spread, either wind blowing it up in the air from the dust in the soil, maybe like a Bacillus anthrax, or a Vibrio cholera going down a water stream, or an E. coli, where maybe animals pooped in the water up here. And foodborne, of course, as I mentioned in my video, always prepare your food, cook it well to minimize the risk of getting a pathogen, because they can get on foodstuffs fairly easily during processing. We also mentioned biological means of transmission, and we call these vectors. Vectors are normally insects, ticks, mosquitoes, flies, and the like, but they can be small mammals or other things than insects. And then we saw biological and mechanical transmission, where mechanical is just that fly comes around, lands on something with that pathogen, sticks to its feet, it flies up, it comes up, it lands on my sandwich, the pathogen jumps off, I eat the sandwich, I get the disease. But biological transmission is where that insect is, it's more of a biological interaction between you and the insect, like a mosquito biting you, a tick biting you, things of that nature. So we're going to kind of walk through some examples here, things you might expect to see on the quiz or the test, and sort of figure out, how these terminologies apply to scenarios. These are going to be like test questions, right? Let's say you have a village over here. This village is Eric Land. Eric Land is a population of about 1,000 people. So here we'll start our graph. We'll have a number of cases over time. Let's zoom in here a little bit. Let's say Eric Land gets its water from a local stream, where they come down and they get little buckets of water and they carry it back up and they drink. And let's say life is happy. And these people, they herd sheep. Here's the sheep. They're up here, they do their thing. Um, they're normally sort of pinned in. Let's say, let's just say that. Let's say one day the sheep herders decide, you know what? I think it's best if we don't pin in our sheep. So they get rid of that, and the sheep spend a lot of time on that riverbank. Then after a heavy rain and that river goes high, we see disease X increase in abundance of people in this village. As they keep drinking from the stream, the incidence of that disease increases over time, where let's say 80% of the population of Eric Land gets disease X. Now, I would ask you a series of questions, and I wouldn't try to trick you in per se, but just answer in the most straightforward way possible, right? So I would say, what is the most likely reservoir of this disease in this scenario? Um, Two answers would probably be acceptable. It could be the sheep. Always sneeze in your shirt, or the soil, possibly, that the sheep inhabit. And they get in their digestive tract and they poop it out. All in that river. How is that um, pathogen transmitted to host, where it causes disease? The inhabitants of Eric. Macy? Yes. The river, which means it is vehicle transmission, waterborne. And um, for this, we don't know any symptoms yet, so we can't really ask about host-to-host transmission. But if 80% of the people in the Eric Land were infected, what would that be? Grace? Yes. An epidemic. It's epidemic because a large percentage of the population are infected. However, it's isolated to Eric Land, not the world, so it is not pandemic. Again, the sheep is the reservoir. It was transmitted through waterborne vehicle transmission to infect the people of Eric Land, and we see a local epidemic of that disease in there. So let's do one more. Let's say there's a big city, and we'll call this Beecraft Metropolis. 2 million people live in Beecraft Metropolis. It's a bustling city. It usually doesn't have to worry about little things like high insect populations because there's not a lot of forest around. It's all urban, right? But let's say one year it was a little warmer, and just a series of events led to a higher mosquito population in Beecraft Metropolis. Here we'll make our chart again, number of cases over time. And basically, in the summer months, you see a jump in cases of disease Y. Right? And it goes up very rapidly in Beecraft Metropolis because the people are so condensed, right? The transmission, it's hard to contain. So the symptoms of disease Y are generally, we'll say, lots of sneezing, fever, aches, and yeah, that's good. And we reach epidemic proportions, but eventually, at this time point out here, it goes global. Now, some questions we might get are, what is the reservoir of this pathogen? Now, this could be a little tricky. This, you would have to say, you cannot determine that based on the information provided, because it is unlikely that vector or that mosquito is the reservoir. Of course, I just gave you the answer to the second question. What is the mode of transmission? It would be vector transmission. More specifically, and you want to be specific on your test, biological transmission through a mosquito vector. And it started here. What is the most likely way that this disease spreads from host to host, given the rapid increase in incidence in a short amount of time? Bryn? Correct. Droplet transmission, where a droplet from person to person or person to inanimate object to person led to a rapid spreading in the city with a very, where people are very close knit with one another. So droplet transmission. And while it was epidemic pretty early on, at this stage when it became global, what do we classify that disease as? Of course, you all know this now. Again, pandemic. Disease Y has become pandemic. So what started at an unknown reservoir, it was transmitted through vector transmission, biological vector transmission, this mosquito, to the first host. Then it was spread through via droplet transmission from host to host to host until it eventually became an epidemic and ultimately a pandemic. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of questions to expect on the quiz and the test coming up. It's kind of glary. Hopefully you can see it enough. But yeah, if you have any sort of questions on this, feel free to write me an email, and I will respond as quick as I can. I'm getting a lot of emails from a lot of classes right now, but I'm trying to keep up. I'm going to shoot for 2 lectures a week. We'll see how that goes. I think I'm getting better at the PowerPoint lectures. So stay healthy, everyone, and I will see you, hopefully, well, I won't see you next week or the week after. Spring break is next week.